If you've been following along with the Sales History podcast for any period of time, you probably realize that I like to end every season with a story. And so I'm going to do that again now as I shift my attention to the launch of my new book coming out at the end of January. So depending on when you're listening to this, you can pre-order it now or you can buy it, called 4 Levers Negotiating. And this story today is a story about negotiating. Before we go there, though, I wanted to start with just a little story about the history of negotiating. While John Patterson and Arthur Sheldon were defining modern sales in the 1890s and early 1900s, there weren't any negotiation experts before 1975. Why? Well, it was because they didn't really have to negotiate. For the first 3/4 of the 20th century, U.S. law protected sellers from price competition. Through a series of acts like the Miller-Tydings Act of 1937 and the McGuire Amendment of 1952 that I talked about in a previous episode, manufacturers could legally set minimum resale prices. In other words, if you sold a product, you couldn't undercut your competitors on price, and they couldn't undercut you. Back then, the system was called fair trade. So salespeople sold on value within fixed pricing boundaries. Then in 1975, free trade became the rage, and the Consumer Goods Pricing Act repealed those previous protections. Discounting wars began, margins eroded, and for the first time in the modern sales profession, you had to learn to negotiate overnight. Now, here's what's interesting. Back then, there was a guy named Chester Karras who, from my research, was first with the negotiating game, actually just before the 1975 Act, and initially it filled the void. Things like BATNA, Getting to Yes, was published soon after by Fisher and Urey and the Harvard Negotiation Project, and negotiating frameworks are born. We still negotiate using those 1970s and 1980s foundations. They may have been different names, but we still treat negotiating as if it's the peak of the sales engagement. I don't believe that's sustainable. And again, with the new book, Shameless Self-Promotion, a lot more to come on that. But it's why I had accidentally developed the 4 Levers Negotiating framework a few years ago. And so what I'm going to do is tell you a story about a negotiation issue that had come up in 1907. And I think it's a really telling story for why we need to rethink negotiating today. But I think it's a great story anyway. So let's dig in, the final episode of this season. And I promise there's more to come next season. So hang in there.
There is nothing new in the world of sales except for the history you do not know. Welcome to the Sales History Podcast, bringing the brilliant and sometimes strange minds, methods, and ideas from the sales profession's past with applications to today. Here is your host, the best-selling author of 2 books, with a 3rd coming in January of 2026. CSP speaker, trainer, and nerd, Todd Caponi.
The Salesman Who Lacked Courage. This is a story I found in a 1907 edition of System magazine. It's written by Daniel Lewis Hansen, who was the sales manager of the Federal Company. Here goes. The telegram read very clearly, "Our price $500 high. Can I cut?" The sender of it, Johnson, for years had been one of our best staple salesmen. He had sold pipe, fittings, steam goods, and regular plumbing material in large quantities and at regular prices, but I had been afraid to send him out on special contracts that required patience and nerve, for he had neither. Among the trade, he had friends by the 100, kept them too, and made more at the same time. His friends understood that friendship to Johnson above everything else meant giving him orders. They thought the more of him for it. Now, I could get staple salesmen by the score, But to round up a high-grade specialty man was out of the question. It became simply a case of educating someone, and it was better to take a man who had shown his loyalty than to gamble on new blood entirely. So I determined to give Johnson a trial on the Acropolis School account. A job, by the way, that was way outside of our regular territory. In sending out Johnson, I had explained to him that success meant a great deal more to him personally than it did to us as a firm, that it would lift him out from among the line of ordinary $1,200 a year men and make him one whose work would be pleasanter as well as more profitable. I had, in short, given him a good jolly as well as expense money. And here was the $20,000 school contract in the air. Back went my reply. Don't cut. Hold deal open. We'll be there tomorrow. When I met my salesman in the morning, it was evident that he felt greatly encouraged by my coming. He had succeeded in postponing the letting of the contract until that evening. In fact, had gotten permission to put in a supplemental bid. In looking over his preliminary work, I found that he had done everything except mail the order. His data was complete. The personality of the board, the class of fixtures used in the other schools, the feeling of the trade towards us, the names of our competitors, what fixtures they had submitted. But when it came to the other bids, I absolutely refused even to look at them, much less discuss how we would cut our own figure. You have our lowest price, I said. It is that or nothing. I went in with him, however, and looked over the sample fixtures, found them in good working order and in presentable shape. At breakfast, I kept as far from the subject of Acropolis and its schools as possible. I told some of my newest stories, talked about the war in Manchuria, touched upon politics a little, anything, in fact, except business. The nearest I came to that was an allusion to the fact that Randall had built himself a new house on the drive. Randall was our Western specialty man, and Johnson knew of his financial rise since he entered that particular field of work. It was a glimpse into paradise, and Johnson took it with enravished eyes. When we rose from the table, Johnson said, "You first want to meet the members of the board, I suppose?" "First, we will go to your room," I replied. When there, I said, "Sit down, Johnson, for I am going to have a heart-to-heart talk with you. I want you, however, to feel that I am more than your employer. I am your friend. Johnson, you've been doing in business just what the little boys of my time did down at the old mill pond. They got a little ways from shore, lay down, their heads only showing above the water, and pretended that they were swimming. But it was just make-believe, for they were resting their hands on the bottom, kicking the water with their feet, moving around a little, but always on their hands in water not over 18 inches deep. If they had stood up, their knees would have been above the surface." But right there, the comparison stops, Johnson. For all the boys I knew who used to make believe swimming, not a single one, there was who did not become a good swimmer, unafraid of the deepest water. But you, Johnson, are still paddling along, hanging on to the bottom, selling pipe, valves, and plumbing goods at competitive prices. That's just paddling, and you are afraid of the deep water. Now, I'm going to do with you just as the big boys did with us little fellows once in a while. I'm going to throw you out into deep water, and you must sink or swim. It is all right for a little fellow to paddle along shore, but it makes me sick to see a great, big, hulking fellow like you make believe, and I'm not going to stand for it. Johnson's face had been red and white by turn, and his mouth had opened repeatedly, but I did not give him an opportunity to talk. I have not come here to see the school board or the trade or the competitors. I am the executive of this business and not a salesman. I am here to see you and to be on hand in case you fail to land the order, to pay you your salary up to the end of the month, which is 10 days distance. I'll get some little fellow to do the paddling in this territory after today. Just now, I'm looking for an A1 high-grade salesman able to handle big deals. But I told them that you were coming, protested Johnson. Go and tell them, I replied, that I have been here and have gone, or tell them anything else you want to. Goodbye, and don't forget that I have money enough along for your salary. That night at dinner, I could not keep Johnson from talking business. He insisted on telling just how he had secured the order without cutting the price 1 cent from our original bid. Don't give me the details, I urged. I will have a much better opinion of your ability if I don't see every rope and pulley. A good pilot moves the helm port or starboard as his judgment dictates. Would the passengers think more of his skill if he insisted on boxing the compass aloud every half hour and explaining the reason for every move? You have secured a nice job. You have pulled yourself up several notches in the world. Don't spoil the admiration that men feel for you by telling how you did it. That is the mark of senility. As we got out of the sleeper the next morning, Johnson asked, would you have really fired me if I had fallen down? There was no reply, for I had just been asking myself the same question without getting a satisfactory answer. Johnson spoke again. I guess I was like the inside can of an ice cream freezer. The cream was there, and so was the flavoring, but it was just fluid. You came along and put a lot of ice around that can, and some salt. My competitors did the turning. I'm solid now. And so he was. Johnson had been stiffened up so that from that day onward, he became, without exception, our very best specialty man. So that's the story from 1907 of an individual who had softened through this idea that because the customer was asking, we were a discount. And instead, he was taught to deliver pricing with confidence and deliver it on a sound basis so that the customer saw it, and it sounds like there was no pushback. He got the price for the value of the solution that he was providing. So what are the lessons here? Well, I really think about it in 4 ways. Number 1 is Johnson's previous failure wasn't pricing. It was belief. And this story shows that customers sense when sellers don't believe their own numbers. I think there's so much missing in today's way that we think about delivering, proposing, and negotiating pricing, where we haven't provided a structure or a framework for our salespeople. And as a result, it's hard to generate belief that way. Number 2 is I felt like this confidence is portrayed as felt, not spoken. In other words, I love that story at the end that the less Johnson explained, the more credible he became. I think there's a lesson there. Number 3 is when you think about leadership. In this case, this manager came in and acted as a constraint by saying, hey, listen, no discounts, no theatrics, no rescue. This forced Johnson to negotiate like a professional, not somebody who was pleading. And number 4 is Johnson stopped seeking permission internally and externally. It became an act of service, not survival, to stick to his guns. And so I thought that that was really, really interesting. I also felt listening to the story that, negotiating anxiety is ancient, right? This story is from 1907. The discounting in many cases becomes emotional, not rational. What I teach through 4 levers negotiating is clarity, giving individuals a structure for the way that they deliver, propose, and negotiate pricing that is based on a sound basis. And also this idea that courage is a prerequisite for trust, that we've got to internalize that. The hardest negotiation, in my opinion, isn't really with procurement. It's with the seller's own fear. I hope you enjoyed this story. I think there's so much to learn from it. And again, my shameless self-promotion, the book 4 Levers Negotiating aims to help with so much of this. It's partnered with Matt Holt Books, Ben Bella Books, distributed by Simon & Schuster. It will be out at the end of January. If you're listening to this now, you can pre-order it anywhere. If you're listening to it post-January, you can buy it anywhere in any format. But as always, I so adore sharing these stories with you through the Sales History Podcast. Like I've said, this is a hobby. I will and do continue to post daily at Sales Historian on both Instagram and X, quotes, pictures, cartoons, images from sales histories past, and try to tie it to today as much as possible. There are things history got right that we got wrong. When it comes to negotiating, we talk so much about how the world of selling has changed so much, and we have changed along with it, especially in this as-a-service economy. Negotiation truly has not changed with it. We treat negotiating like it is the peak of the selling engagement, not the early milestone in this proliferation of information that we have today, in the rise of AI already exposing our pricing models. You want customers that buy, stay, buy more, advocate, take you with them to their next company. And if every single customer pays a different amount based on how well or poorly you negotiated it, that's a race to the bottom for everybody. It's no longer sustainable. So, as always, I also want to add, if you've got ideas, if you've got thoughts, if you've got things you want me to research, please let me know. You can email me, toddcaponi.com. There's forms in there you can send over to me. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. And I so appreciate you sharing these episodes, giving it your accurate and honest star rating wherever you listen. And keep an eye out because there will be more episodes coming next year. Right now, I'm researching one on the impact of prohibition on sales. So I can't wait to share that one with you. But again, until next time, thanks again for listening.